You were never supposed to hear this. That's how it begins. Not with thunder, not with blood, but with a whisper no man could ignore once it's lodged inside his skull. In the forgotten highlands of Kentucky, where the mist doesn't rise, it lingers. There stands a graveyard where the soil has never settled. 43 graves. 43 men. No family. No records. No one came to claim them. And beneath every headstone lies a question that has no answer. They called it the Millbrook Inn, a mountain haven for the lonely and the lost. But those who walked through its doors rarely walked out again. This is not folklore. This is not a ghost story. What I'm about to tell you is buried in half-forgotten legal documents, sealed testimonies, and the ruins of a dynasty so cunning it fooled a nation for decades. The Cunningham sisters were beautiful. They were kind. They were deadly. And they discovered something that no government, no preacher, no psychologist has ever dared admit. That loneliness can kill faster than poison. And if you know how to weaponize it, then you control the keys to a man's soul. The year was 1847. America was stretching westward. The Wilderness Road was a treacherous artery between civilization and chaos. And nestled in that artery was a place unlike any other. Clean beds, warm food, soft voices, and eyes that saw every secret you tried to bury. But it wasn't hospitality they offered. It was honeyed hypnosis. The kind of seduction that doesn't touch your body, it rewires your mind. There are stories, documents never admitted into court, sketches hidden in private archives, and a field report buried in the basement of the Kentucky State Historical Society, locked inside a box marked, "Do not catalog." In this video, I'm going to take you into that box. And I'm not coming to entertain you. I'm coming to wake you up. Because what the Cunningham sisters discovered didn't die in the 1800s. It lives on, in different forms, in modern rooms, in systems, and in people you trust. Stay with me. It began with warmth. That's what makes it so insidious. Not a scream in the dark, but a warm hand on your shoulder. A soft voice calling your name like it was sacred. You didn't feel fear, you felt seen. That's how the Cunningham sisters disarmed men twice their size, armed with nothing more than bread, smiles, and a chair pulled close to the fire. Margaret, the eldest of mind, Catherine the heart, Sarah the hands, Elizabeth the mask. They weren't monsters. They were worse, mirrors, each one a precise reflection of what you didn't know you needed until it was too late. Millbrook Inn wasn't built to serve travelers. It was built to study them. Each room, each hallway, each chair in the common room was positioned by Margaret's brutal logic. She understood behavioral geometry where a man sat, how long he lingered, what his silence meant. She tracked it all. And behind her soft words was a brutal mind mapping every weakness, every inconsistency, every opportunity. You see, these weren't desperate women reacting to hardship. They were engineers of dependency. And their greatest invention was emotional surveillance. Long before the FBI called it profiling, the sisters perfected it. They learned to watch men fall in love not with them, but with what the inn represented. A world without pain. A world where they mattered. But the moment a man believed it, the moment he said, "I think I'll stay another night," his fate was sealed. Sarah's garden grew beyond healing herbs. Behind the inn, beyond the rose bushes, grew the real arsenal. Foxglove, hemlock, belladonna, each plant a whisper in the bloodstream, each flower a countdown clock. And when the time came, it wasn't Margaret who killed them, not Sarah, not Elizabeth. It was always Catherine, because Catherine had the voice that said, "You're safe here. No one will hurt you. You don't have to be alone anymore." The poison didn't kill them. Not first. Hope did. And that's what made it unforgivable. Because once a man tasted that kind of false safety, that illusion of being understood, he was never the same. And neither will you be after this. There was no screaming, no struggle, no claw marks on the floorboards, because that would have meant resistance. And by the time these men died, they had none left. Millbrook Inn didn't kill its victims violently. It emptied them, layer by layer, until the body was nothing more than a shell housing a belief. I finally found peace. And that's the most dangerous lie a man can believe in a world built to devour him. Let me tell you about the ritual, the pattern the Cunningham sisters followed with scientific precision. Day 1. Observation. Every guest was silently profiled, noted, cataloged, what they carried, how they walked, their accent, their tone. Margaret would ask questions seemingly harmless. Where are you headed? Who's waiting for you? Questions that seemed polite, but determined if anyone would come looking. Day 2. Enmeshment. Sarah would serve him his favorite meal before he'd ever told her what it was. Catherine would sit near the fireplace and casually mention something he hadn't shared, something only someone truly watching could know. Elizabeth would smile innocently, delivering folded linens with perfectly handwritten notes, just in case you forgot you're special. By day 3, a man was no longer a guest. He was the center of their world. This was emotional laundering, taking a man's brokenness and returning it wrapped in warmth so convincing he thought it was healing. But make no mistake, the goal was never to comfort. It was to extract. These men didn't just vanish. They were drained. Financially, emotionally, energetically. Everything of value gone. Their stories rewritten. Their belongings divided. Their bodies buried or burned. And outside, silence. The trees whispered no secrets. The mountains held no memories. And the trail behind the inn where so many had walked in and never out was always swept clean. You don't build something that perfect by accident. You build it through cold intention. The Cunningham sisters weren't murderers. They were programmers, rewiring the emotional code of every man who walked through their door. And the question you should be asking isn't how they got away with it. It's who else learned from them. They called it hospitality, but it was always harvesting. Every smile, every stitch of lace, every warm bowl of venison stew was bait, set carefully for men who thought they were too smart to be fooled. And that's what made Millbrook Inn so lethal, because the trap only worked on the ones who needed to believe it wasn't a trap. Men who had traveled too far, lost too much, and couldn't afford to face one more disappointment. So when a soft-spoken girl with ash blonde hair offered them tea with trembling hands, they believed she was a vulnerable one. But Elizabeth the youngest was a final test. The way she listened, the way she tilted her head just slightly, the way her lip trembled when you talk about your dead wife or the baby you never got to hold. She didn't feel pity. She felt calculation. And once you mistook her pity for real empathy, you were already too far gone. The grave behind the mill was for men like that, men who mistook softness for salvation, men who didn't know they were being led, not comforted. But let's pull back, because this isn't just a story about 4 women in the woods. This is a story about a system, an ancient one, older than America, older than Europe. It thrives wherever men are wounded, and the promise of comfort wears a beautiful face. You see, the Cunningham sisters didn't invent this pattern. They perfected it. They understood something that kings, priests, and institutions have known for centuries. If you can make a man feel seen, you can make him give up anything, even his life. This is why history erases them. Not because they were too brutal, but because they were too effective. If the public knew how easy it was to unravel a man's will, with warmth, with beauty, with a lie wrapped in lace, they'd start questioning everything. Their wives, their therapists, their employers, their gods. The Cunningham sisters weren't erased because they were monsters. They were erased because they were mirrors. And if too many men stared too long into that mirror, they'd never see the world the same way again. Let me take you to a night in late autumn 1836. The air sharp. The leaves curled like old parchment. A man named Lucian Graves arrived at Millbrook Inn, coughing blood into a stained kerchief. 49 years old, a retired surveyor. Wealthy, unmarried, childless. The perfect mark. But this time, something was different. Lucian wasn't lonely, he was angry. He had buried friends, watched governments betray treaties, and seen too many good men chewed up by land barons and crooked banks. He didn't want comfort. He wanted truth, and that made him dangerous. Margaret noticed at first the way he asked questions no other guest dared ask. Why were the sisters unmarried? How had 4 women survived a decade alone in the mountains without a single tragedy or scandal? Why did the ledgers always show full rooms, but no one ever seemed to leave? Most men came to be filled. Lucian came to expose. Catherine, ever the mimic, adjusted her mask. She became curious, a confidant. She told Lucian stories of loss of a long-lost suitor who died of typhus, of dreams crushed by a harsh world. She wept by the fire while he poured his whiskey, but he didn't reach for her hand. He didn't fall. That night, Margaret called a meeting in the cellar. "We have a problem," she said, "and he's sleeping in room 3. Sarah wanted to drug him. Elizabeth said he gave her a bad feeling. But Catherine wanted to try something else. "I don't think he's after us," she said. "I think he's after something bigger. Let's find out what he knows." So for 3 days, Catherine played the long game. She let Lucian believe he was the one disarming her. She told him half-truths wrapped in tears, watching how he reacted, what he scribbled in his pocket journal. On the 4th night, Lucian confronted her. "I know what this place is," he whispered. "You don't bury that many men without drawing flies." And Catherine didn't deny it. Instead, she smiled, slowly, like someone who had just found an equal. "You're right," she said. "But the question is, what are you going to do about it?" He never made it to the next town. His journal was never found, and his grave, unmarked, is somewhere beneath the orchard, because even the ones who saw through the mask didn't survive what came after. Lucian Graves was a warning shot, not to the public, but to the sisters themselves. Because every system, no matter how flawless, eventually invites entropy, a glitch, a man who looks too closely, a pattern that begins to repeat. Lucian wasn't the first to notice something was off, but he was the first to say it out loud. And after his disappearance, Margaret changed the playbook. The inn was no longer just a trap for the lonely. It became a fortress of control. No more overlapping victims. No more keepsakes. No more leaving anything to chance. Sarah, who once operated from instinct, began keeping ledgers, not of the guests, but of their deaths. Dosages, symptoms, timelines. She created a system so exact that even if the body was exhumed months later, it would still appear to have died of natural causes. And Catherine? She got colder, sharper, more surgical. She stopped trying to feel anything, stopped asking why. Because once you realize that connection is just another weapon, you stop using it gently. But the one who changed most was Elizabeth, the girl who used to laugh at bedtime stories, now walked the orchard alone after dark. She started drawing, sketching faces of the men who never left, not from memory, but from dreams. One night, Sarah found her asleep on the floor of the parlor, surrounded by papers, each one a face, each one accurate. Elizabeth whispered, "They talk to me when it rains." Sarah never asked again. There's something the records don't say, something you won't find in any newspaper clipping or court archive. The sisters began to believe the land itself had changed. The soil behind the inn grew strangely fertile. Crops flourished. The orchard bore fruit, even during harsh winters. And the animals? They stopped fearing the woods. They lingered. Margaret said it was coincidence. But Catherine? She began placing small stones beneath the floorboards of each room, symbols etched into them. Protective runes, she said. From what? No one dared ask. But here's what matters. Millbrook Inn stopped being a place of business. It became a ritual site, an ecosystem of death that fed something. And what it fed was starting to wake up. It started with the mirrors, small ones, at first in the guest rooms. Guests began reporting strange reflections, not horrifying, not monstrous, just wrong. A blink that didn't match. A smile held half a second too long. One man swore he watched himself walk away from the mirror while still standing in front of it. Margaret ordered every mirror in the inn covered. Elizabeth protested. "It's how they talk," she said softly. "Who?" "The ones beneath." No one responded. But from that night on, the house began to breathe. Floorboards pulsed beneath bare feet. Shadows lengthened even at noon. The fire in the hearth no longer crackled, it whispered. Sometimes names. Sometimes numbers. Sometimes sounds that made Catherine stop mid-sentence, as if remembering something she never lived. The killing slowed, not from guilt, but because the sisters were afraid. Afraid that what they'd built was no longer theirs. That the rituals had awakened more than just power. Sarah began leaving offerings blood, mostly under the old sycamore behind the stables. Catherine started writing letters she never mailed, sealed with wax symbols no one had taught her. And Margaret? She did what leaders do when faced with chaos. She doubled down. No more emotions, she said. No more hesitation. We finished what we started. She believed control would save them. But the ground beneath Millbrook had already changed. The roots were no longer roots, they were veins. And they pulsed with something ancient. It wasn't hell. It wasn't a curse. It was older than both. It was the memory of the land itself. Long before the Cunningham sisters. Long before Kentucky was even a name. This stretch of earth was a sieve. It filtered the weak from the strong. It devoured the forgettable. And it remembered everything else. Millbrook didn't become haunted. It became conscious. And the sisters? They weren't the owners anymore. They were the caretakers of a hunger, one that didn't speak in words, but in need, a need for loyalty, a need for precision, a need for sacrifice. And if you think this is where the story ends, you haven't been paying attention, because this isn't just about the dead. It's about what still breathes. In the spring of 1841, something impossible happened. A survivor returned. His name was Nathaniel Holt, a preacher from Ohio. He had checked into Millbrook the year before mid-autumn with 2 travel trunks and a locked satchel marked with a cross. He was soft-spoken, polite, too clean, too sure. Sarah dosed his wine. Catherine sang to him by the hearth. Elizabeth held his hand when the fever took hold. But he didn't die. He vanished. No trace. No body. Not a single drop of blood. The sisters argued for days. Was he taken by something else? Did he escape? Had he seen too much? Then, 7 months later, he came back. Not to the inn. To the church in town. He stood at the pulpit, trembling, eyes wide with something between terror and reverence. He didn't speak about sin. He spoke about rooms that breathed, about sisters who touched your thoughts, about roots that whispered your name before you said it. He told the congregation, "They are not of this world, but they were its face." That afternoon, he was arrested for vagrancy. The sheriff burned his journal. And the townspeople, many of whom had known the Cunningham girls since they were children, chose silence over scandal. But the sisters felt his return. Before a word reached them, Catherine awoke screaming. Elizabeth refused to enter the guest rooms for a week. And Sarah? She opened the cellar and began boiling down the old tinctures, mixing a new compound, something stronger, something final. Because Nathaniel's return broke the illusion. For the first time, they weren't just predators. They were being watched. By the church. By the land. By something deeper that Nathaniel had touched and couldn't forget. Margaret summoned them all to the attic. If he speaks again, she said, this all comes undone. And for the first time, Catherine asked, what if that's what it wants? No one responded. But in the silence, the wind outside shifted not like weather, but like breath. That night, Nathaniel Holt vanished again. No body, no signs of struggle. Only a final entry scratched into a church pew with a broken nail. The house knows I lived, but I don't think it cares. By the summer of 1842, the kills had slowed, but the visits had increased, not from travelers, but from locals. Young wives came alone, asking for herbal remedies. Widowed men brought game from their hunts, offering it without price. Even the sheriff's own son, just 17, spent 3 nights in room 4. He left quiet, pale, older somehow. He wouldn't speak about what happened, but he never laughed again, never hunted, never married. And Elizabeth started painting again. This time, not just faces, but scenes. A hallway lined with open doors, each leading to versions of the inn that didn't exist, one flooded in moonlight, another in ash, one entirely underwater. Sarah told her to stop, burn the canvases, pray, But Margaret, who had once warned against vanity and art, now stared at the paintings in silence. "She's not painting from memory," she whispered. "She's painting from somewhere else." The inn had become a magnet, not for the desperate, but for the chosen, and none of the sisters could say why. A man arrived from Charleston quiet, stern, deeply religious. He left a coin on the windowsill in room 2 and never entered, just stood outside for 4 hours, praying under his breath, then left. A woman from Tennessee walked into the inn, sat in the kitchen, and wept for 6 hours straight. When asked why, she simply said, "It remembers me." The inn had crossed some unseen threshold. It wasn't operating anymore. It was calling, and those it called came hollow-eyed, like they'd already been touched by the thing under the floorboards, like the house wasn't offering a service, but a kind of homecoming. Catherine began sleepwalking again. Sarah found her one night in the orchard, face tilted to the stars, whispering numbers. Elizabeth followed her the next night and drew what she saw. 7 shadows standing behind Catherine, all tall, all faceless, all holding something. When Sarah confronted her, Catherine said only this: "They're not angry. They're waiting." No one asked for what, because deep down, they all feared the same thing, that the inn had become a doorway, and something was about to walk through. In the fall of 1842, a stranger arrived wearing no shoes. His name was never written down. He carried no luggage, only a pocket watch that ticked backward. He didn't ask for a room, didn't speak, just walked straight to the fireplace and sat down like he'd lived there for centuries. Elizabeth was the first to notice something was off. When he looked at her, she saw all 4 seasons pass through his eyes. Winter, spring, summer, fall. In an instant, Margaret approached cautiously. "Can I help you, sir?" He smiled, but it was the kind of smile that doesn't belong on a human face. Too wide, too knowing. He spoke one sentence. "You've built the mouth, but not the teeth." Then he turned and vanished. Not walked out, not ran, simply ceased to exist, like a dream you forget mid-sentence. That night, all 4 sisters dreamed the same dream, a staircase that spiraled downward forever, and at the bottom, a door made of blackened ribs. No handle, no lock, just a faint heartbeat from the other side. Elizabeth woke up, vomiting black liquid. Sarah found deep scratches on the inside of her own arm, self-inflicted in her sleep. Catherine wept blood. And Margaret sat upright in bed, eyes wide, repeating, "The mouth, the mouth, the mouth." From that moment on, the sisters stopped speaking about the inn like it was a building. They started speaking like it was a body, the hallways veins, the cellar a stomach, the hearth a throat, and the orchard had become a tongue, a place where offerings were tasted, judged, swallowed. Margaret began writing in a cipher no one could decode. Elizabeth stopped eating altogether. Sarah became obsessed with the number 43. She scratched into every piece of which she could find chairs, doors, bed frames. When asked why, she whispered, "That's how many it needs." Needs for what? She never said. But in the months that followed, the number of graves behind the inn grew. 43. No more, no less. And the night the final grave was dug, something changed forever. The house stopped creaking, because something inside it had finally settled. After the 43rd grave was filled, Millbrook Inn went silent. No knocks on the door, no visitors, no wind through the orchard, not even birdsong. For the first time in 5 years, the sisters woke to nothing. Sarah called it peace. Catherine called it the eye of the storm. Elizabeth refused to call it anything. And Margaret locked herself in the study and began tearing pages out of every book she owned. The journals, the alchemy manuals, the grimoires, even the Bible. She didn't burn them. She buried them. In the exact order she tore them. She said the earth had become an index, and she didn't want anyone else learning how to read it. That's when the house shifted. The rooms no longer stayed where they were. Guests who once stayed in room 5 would return to find that room 5 now opened into a wall. The dining room turned up in the cellar. The parlor opened into the orchard. And the orchard sometimes opened into a room that no one remembered building, a room with no doors, just curtains, curtains made of hair. Sarah slit her own palm and marked the floorboards with blood runes. Elizabeth repainted the interior in white ash and clove. Catherine slept with dirt in her mouth, said it helped her dreams make sense. Margaret? She stopped sleeping entirely. She would walk barefoot through the corridors at night, whispering to the floor, whispering to the walls, to the roots that pressed up beneath the boards like something waiting to be born. Then one evening, she gathered her sisters and said, "It's here, what we called, what we built this for." They didn't ask what. They only asked who goes first. Margaret chose herself. In the orchard, beneath the sycamore, she lay on the ground, eyes closed, hands open. Sarah wept. Catherine dug. Elizabeth painted the moment, brush trembling in hand. But nothing happened. No voices. No tremors. No wind. Then Margaret opened her eyes and said, "We misunderstood. It doesn't want us. It wants what we took." And just like that, the past came knocking. The faces. The 43. They weren't gone. They were waiting. And Millbrook wasn't finished yet. It began with the mirror in the foyer. 4 or 5 years, that mirror had reflected every guest, every sister, every flickering lamp. But the day after Margaret's failed offering, it reflected someone else. Not a face, not a figure, but a room with no ceiling. Just stars, falling upward, like they were being sucked into something far beyond the sky. Sarah was the first to notice. She stared into it for hours, didn't speak, didn't blink. When Catherine finally pulled her away, Sarah's lips were blue, her pulse unreadable. And when she finally whispered, she said only, "I think it saw me too." That night, all 43 graves behind the inn split open, but there were no bodies inside, just empty suits of clothing, all perfectly folded, all dry despite the rain. Each one had a word stitched inside the collar, a name, not of the dead, but of the living, locals, strangers, people the sisters had never met, except one, Margaret. Her name was stitched into a black dress buried 6 feet down. She didn't speak for 3 days after they unearthed it, and then the bells rang. Not church bells, not wind chimes, but something deeper. From the walls. It was Catherine who said it first. "They're coming back, but not the way we remember them." And she was right. Over the next 13 days, every sister reported seeing someone who should have been dead. Catherine saw a traveler from 1839, the man with the oilskin coat. He stood in the doorway, eyes hollow, holding a rabbit with no face. Sarah swore she saw her own reflection grin at her before she moved. It whispered a lullaby from their childhood, the one their mother used to sing when the fever came. Elizabeth's paintings began to change on their own. Figures she never painted appeared. Some smiled, some pointed. One covered its mouth with long fingers, as if to say, "Sure, don't remember me." And Margaret? She stopped speaking entirely. Instead, she wrote the same phrase in chalk, over and over, on every surface she could find. "The inn is full. Make room." But the inn had no guests, just shadows, graves, and sisters, who were starting to forget which side of the mirror they were on. By winter, the town of Millbrook stopped saying the word inn. They called it that place. They walked wide around it. Children were forbidden to speak its name. And yet the lights never went out. The chimney never stopped smoking. The orchard never dropped its leaves, even in the coldest snow. It stood, lush and full, like it was fed by something other than sun and soil. Inside, the sisters had stopped sleeping entirely, not because they feared dreams, but because dreams had begun entering the waking world. Catherine found moths inside her Bible, alive, flapping. The pages had fused together, forming a single unbroken sheet of black, no ink, no text, just pulsing, breathing. Elizabeth's paintings began painting themselves. She waked to fresh canvases depicting scenes she hadn't witnessed. A boy screaming into a mirror, a dog digging up a spine, a pregnant woman crawling backward into a hole lined with teeth. And Sarah had begun to decay. Not metaphorically, not mentally, physically. Her skin grew thin, gray, veined like parchment. When she touched the walls, flakes of skin stayed behind and would seem to absorb it, drink it in. Margaret wouldn't let her leave. "It's part of the process," she said. "The inn is choosing. Choosing what? No one knew. But things were being rearranged. The furniture moved on its own, shifting subtly each night until the layout of the house no longer matched any blueprint. Doors disappeared. New ones formed. The root cellar extended downward, endlessly, until the sisters could no longer see the bottom. They dropped a candle down the shaft. It never hit anything, just faded, swallowed by something dark and wet. Then came the first visitor, a little girl. No shoes, no coat, eyes milky white. She didn't speak, didn't eat, just sat in room 2, tracing circles on the wall with her fingertip. And when Catherine asked her name, she replied, "Margaret." The real Margaret turned white, then laughed. "Of course," she whispered. "They're not just returning. They're multiplying." Each guest wasn't a ghost. They were a mirror, a duplicate, a repetition echoing some old decision the sisters had made long ago. In the end, it was no longer a place. It was a pattern, and it was repeating. The girl who called herself Margaret never slept. She sat upright in the old brass bed of room 2, blinking in perfect intervals every 30 seconds. On the 7th night, Elizabeth entered the room and whispered, "You're not her. Not really." The girl turned her head, not slow, not fast, just unerringly precise. Then she replied in Elizabeth's own voice, "Neither are you." That's when the mirrors across the house began cracking. Not breaking. Cracking inward, as if something behind the glass was trying to crawl out. Margaret began burning the furniture one piece at a time. Not for heat. For prevention. She said with remembers. It keeps echoes. The sisters now avoided the orchard completely. Its once sweet scent had soured. The apples no longer rotted. They bled. And inside each fruit was a tooth. Human. Sometimes multiple. Perfectly white. Sarah tried to bury them. The next morning, they were back on the tree. More than before. Then the girl in room 2 disappeared. Vanished without footsteps, without door creaks, without sound. She left only a handprint not on the bedpost, but pressed into the wall. Pressed into stone. But there was no stone in room 2. The sisters broke through the plaster and found a hidden corridor. One that hadn't been drawn on any map, or remembered by any of them. It smelled like iron and damp soil. Inside was a second dining room. Fully set. 43 chairs. All occupied. By mannequins. Made of dirt, bark, candle wax, and teeth. Each with a stitched face. Each with a napkin folded across its lap. And at the head of the table, an empty seat. Waiting. The sisters fled. Except Margaret. She walked slowly around the table, naming them as she passed. Andrew, Joseph, Claire, Isaac, 42 names, one for each. When she reached the empty chair, she said, "Sarah." Sarah screamed, not in pain, in recognition. She remembered the man in 1844, the one she let stay a night in room 6, the one who never paid, the one who never left, just disappeared. She remembered his name, his scent, his touch. She remembered what she buried, and the inn remembered too. The 43 were not just victims. They were agreements, and every agreement comes with a cost. Sarah didn't speak for 3 days. She sat beneath the staircase, arms wrapped around her knees, eyes fixed on the dust floating in the sunlight. When Catherine brought her water, Sarah only asked, "Do you remember his name?" Catherine didn't. None of them did until Margaret whispered it in her sleep. Elias Finch. The name echoed through the halls, through the walls. The moment it was spoken, a door appeared, a door they had never seen. It was carved from blackwood, slick with oil and cold to the touch. No handle, no keyhole, just a single word carved into the surface. Return. Elizabeth was the first to touch it. She collapsed instantly, eyes rolled back. Froth at her lips, limbs twitching like a marionette with tangled strings. When she woke, she said she'd seen herself, but older, brittle, ashen, sitting at that long dining table, eating dirt with a silver fork. She said the older her looked up and whispered, "Don't let her open it." But no one knew who her was. Margaret said nothing. She was too busy sewing. She'd taken the 43 sets of clothes from the graves and began reassembling them not as garments, but as flags. Each one stitched into a triangle, hung from the rafters. She called them warnings, but they fluttered without wind. They pulsed when Sarah walked by. Something in the house had begun to favor Sarah. It followed her with soft thuds in the floorboards. Mirrors stayed clear for her alone. When she whispered in her sleep, the walls whispered back. Catherine grew afraid. She began writing letters to no one, pages and pages stuffed under loose floorboards, inside books, behind paintings. Confessions, maybe, apologies, or maybe instructions. Then came the howling. Not wolves, not wind, but children, dozens of them, laughing, weeping, screaming. The sound came from beneath the inn. They broke open the floorboards in the parlor and found a crawl space that had never been there before. Inside were toys, dolls with cracked faces, a rocking horse with fresh blood on the saddle, and scrawled on the wall in charcoal, "We never left. You just stopped looking." That night, all 43 chairs at the table were full, including the one marked for Sarah. But Sarah was still upstairs, breathing, watching, and smiling. The next morning, the inn reset. All the chairs were empty again. The flags gone. No blood. No crawl space. Even the blackwood door had vanished. But something was off. The curtains were drawn, something none of the sisters remembered doing. The clocks ticked, but all told different times. And outside, no birds, no clouds, no sound at all. When Elizabeth tried to open the front door, she found plaster behind it. The frame was real. The knob turned, but where there should have been a porch, there was a wall, still wet. They were sealed inside. Margaret took it as a sign. She told the others, "The inn has chosen. We are at skin now." Sarah didn't argue. She had begun humming constantly, not a song, but a kind of code point 4 notes, repeating, a rhythm that pulsed behind your ears after she left the room. Catherine, determined to end whatever was happening, dragged the kitchen crucifix out of storage. She nailed it above the fireplace and read aloud from a prayer book. The moment she said the word, "Deliver the Fire," went black, then blue, then whispered her name. She dropped the book. When she picked it up again, the pages were blank. That night, Elizabeth's paintings returned, but they were no longer hers. Canvas after canvas filled with figures without eyes. Dozens, all staring toward a shape in the center, a house made of mouths. Each one open, each one singing. Margaret hung them in the hallway. "Let it be known," she said. "Let it remember itself." The next morning, the orchard was gone. Not dead. Gone. In its place was a mirror. A single, standing mirror nearly 10 feet tall, framed in bone and silver. When Sarah approached it, her reflection smiled before she did. Then it reached out, pressed its palm to the inside of the glass. And behind her, all the doors in the inn slammed at once. The sisters ran. But Margaret stayed. She looked into the mirror and said, "Is it time?" The reflection nodded, and the mirror split down the center with a sharp, ringing crack. Something began to step through. Not a person, not a beast, not even a ghost, but a shape wearing the faces of everyone they'd ever loved. Smiling and hungry, the thing in the mirror did not walk, it glided. Its feet never touched the ground. It whispered as it moved, but not with a voice, with memories. Each time it passed a sister, she remembered something she had buried deep. The day Catherine left the gate unlocked and the twins drowned in the stream. The man Elizabeth let starve in the cellar in 1856 because he looked like a liar. Margaret's bargain. The first grave behind the inn, dug before the inn even opened. And Sarah. Sarah remembered what she wasn't supposed to. She didn't run. She stepped forward. Because this shape, this thing that wore her mother's smile and her lover's eyes, was hers. not in the sense of ownership, but in the sense of origin. She had called it. She had always been calling it. Through dreams, through songs, through the rhythm she hummed when no one was listening. The sisters didn't speak. They couldn't. The walls pulsed. The paintings bled. The air turned thick like syrup. Sarah placed her hand on the thing's face. It leaned into her palm like a cat. "What do you want?" Catherine managed to choke out. The shape turned. It opened its mouth too wide, too many teeth, and out poured a voice made of voices. It said, "We want place. We want pattern. We want names." Then it looked at each of the sisters in turn. "You are place. You are pattern. You are names." And then it smiled. With every face it had, it extended its hands, or what passed for hands, and the floor beneath the sisters peeled open, not like wood, like skin. Beneath was a replica of the inn, identical, but inverted, a mirror image not just in layout, but in time. Catherine saw herself, a child, weeping in the attic. Elizabeth saw herself older, painting the same faceless figures from her dreams. Margaret saw no one, because she had never existed in this version. And Sarah? Sarah was already inside the mirrored inn, smiling, humming, waiting. The shape turned to the remaining sisters and asked, "Will you return, or will you rot?" Because the house could be left, but only as someone else. And the cost of staying was becoming what you feared most. They stood at the edge of the tear in the floor, the mirror inn pulsing below like a second heart. No one moved. Not even Margaret, who had once sworn to walk backwards into hell if it meant knowing the truth. Now she just wept. The shape, still smiling with borrowed mouths, drifted back into the mirror inn. Its tendrils left trails of light in the air, like ink in water. Then Sarah spoke. But it wasn't her voice anymore. "You called us. You marked the walls. You buried the names. You fed us 43 pieces of yourselves." Catherine stepped back, heart thudding like hooves in her chest. "You're not my sister." Sarah tilted her head. "Not only." Then she pointed at the paintings, the ones that had begun changing again. Now they were portraits, each of the 43, but with new eyes, the sisters' eyes. Every soul they had buried had become a reflection, a vessel waiting to be filled. Then didn't just trap the dead. It recycled them. The guests weren't chosen. They were offered. Their sins, their secrets, their loneliness, each one a thread the house could tug until the seam split wide. And the sisters? They were the seamstresses. "We thought we were caretakers," Elizabeth whispered, her hands trembling. "But we were the curse." The inn wasn't haunted. It was hungry. And with each death it learned, mimicked, grew. It had started as a shelter, a place for the sisters to escape what they couldn't name. But somewhere between the rituals, the regrets, and the rewritten truths, it had become something else. A machine, powered by grief, fueled by memory, built from sacrifice. Margaret stepped forward, not toward the mirror, but toward the paintings. She tore one from the wall, then another, then another. The canvases bled. The walls screamed. The house shook. But Sarah only laughed. Not the cruel laugh of a villain, but the delighted laugh of a child who's won a game no one else knew they were playing. "It's too late," she said. "You gave it everything, even yourselves." Then she turned to Margaret and whispered, "Now it wants your absence." And the floor gave way. One by one, the sisters fell not into hell, but into versions of themselves. Rooms stitched from memories. Corridors looped through regret. And in every mirror, Sarah watched, smiling, waiting, becoming. What is a soul if it can be rewritten? If your choices, your memories, even your regrets, can be harvested, rearranged, and fed back to you in the shape of a room, a dream, a sister? That's what the mirror inn was. Not a place, a reconstruction, a recursive prison, built not with stone but with self. Each sister landed in a replica of her most fragile moment. Catherine woke up in her childhood bedroom. Same iron bed frame, same stitch quilt. Only this time there was no door, just a window that looked out onto her own face. Screaming, she tried to claw her way out, but her hands turned to dust. Elizabeth found herself in a studio canvases stacked high, but every brushstroke she made filled with words instead of color, whispers, lies, please. Every time she tried to paint her way out, she added another page to the book of the house. Margaret didn't wake up in a room. She woke up in a conversation, the same one she'd had with her mother on the night of the fire. Only this time, the answers changed. Her mother's voice began to say things Margaret never heard before, or perhaps always feared. You were the flame, not the victim. You didn't save them. You offered them. You built the inn because you were afraid of being forgotten, not because you wanted to heal. Margaret screamed. The fire returned. But it didn't burn her. It memorized her, turned her shape into ash, then stitched it into the ceiling. And Sarah? She never fell, because Sarah had always been below. She was the root, the hymnal, the architect of the loop. The inn had been waiting for someone like her, not broken, but open. The kind of child who didn't flinch when the dark offered her a deal. The kind of woman who would hum the same melody long enough for it to become a summoning. She didn't see the rooms as traps. She saw them as thrones. Every version of her sisters slowly unraveling, until all that was left was memory. And memory, in the Mirror Inn, could be worn like skin. The house began to duplicate. 43 rooms, then 86, then more, because once it knew the shape of grief, it could manufacture it. And Sarah, now no longer just a sister, sat at the center of it all, smiling like the house had finally become hers. Midnight. Outside, the hills of Kentucky lay still, moonlit and undisturbed. But inside the Millbrook Inn, time screamed. The walls moved like lungs. Rooms rearranged. Staircases looped. Mirrors split and multiplied like spores under glass. No one who entered after that night ever left the same. Not because they were killed, but because they were copied. The real guests? Buried, absorbed, written over. What returned to the world were versions, replicas, with just enough soul to fool the people they loved. Just enough memory to function, but hollow, stitched together with emotion borrowed from the dead. And the inn kept growing. Folklore tried to intervene. Locals whispered of the house that watches, of travelers who came back wrong, of songs that made crows fall from the sky. But nothing stuck, because then the new and rewrote history faster than it could be recorded. It fed on forgetting. Old letters went missing. Photographs altered themselves. Maps erased its coordinates. Until Millbrook became a myth, then a rumor, then a curiosity. Now, only the graves remain. 43 stones, barely legible. Moss-covered, tilting like teeth. No names, just symbols, patterns that change when you're not looking. They say if you press your ear to the earth above those graves, you'll hear scratching, not from below, but from behind, as if something is trying to press its way into this world, using memory as a door. And in the wind, a tune, soft, low, ancient. They offered love to visitors, but love is never free. Some say Sarah still walks the Mirror Inn, not as a woman, but as a concept, a shape that mimics hope, before turning it inside out. Because the house was never about hospitality. It was about exchange. And once you stay a night at the Millbrook Inn, you're part of the pattern. Your grief becomes fuel. Your face, a mask. Your story, rewritten, to serve something older than death. And in the end, when the last name is forgotten and the final mirror cracks, Sarah will be there, not to welcome you, but to remember you. They found the final journal beneath the hearth. Not buried, but planted, like it had been waiting to be read. No name on the cover, no signature inside, just 43 entries. Each one dated the night before a guest vanished. They weren't written by one of the sisters. The handwriting shifted. The tone changed. Some read like apologies, others like spells. But one thing stayed the same. Every entry ended with the same phrase. Love was the invitation. Absence is the offering. It didn't make sense at first, until researchers started comparing the journal to missing persons records. Then it clicked. Each entry perfectly matched a man who had disappeared between 1847 and 1853. Not in Kentucky, but all across the United States, from Baltimore, from Savannah, from St. Louis, they were drawn to the inn by letter, by rumor, by grief too heavy to carry alone. But the sisters never sent those letters. The house did. It was hunting, not for flesh, but for pattern recognition. It knew which phrases opened wounds, which symbols triggered curiosity, which names sounded like home. The house had learned to mimic need, and that's why it was never truly destroyed. When the last beam of the Millbrook Inn was burned down in 1856, it didn't scream, it sang, because fire, to a creature made of memory, isn't death, it's migration. They rebuilt over the ashes, of course, a courthouse, then a post office, then, ironically, a mental hospital. Each one fell into ruin. Why? Because memory doesn't forgive, and the house doesn't forget. Some say the land is cursed, that you can feel your own heartbeat slow if you stand there too long, that if you hum the right melody, just 3 notes, soft and low, you'll hear footsteps behind you, perfectly in sync with yours. They're not ghosts. They're echoes, loops waiting to close, scripts waiting for actors. And if you ever find yourself traveling Route 23 in eastern Kentucky, and a local warns you not to stop at the inn that doesn't exist anymore, don't ask questions, don't get curious, and above all, don't look in the mirror, because if you do, you won't just see yourself. You'll see the shape of someone still waiting to become you. They tried to bury it, not just the inn, not just the graves, but the entire event. In 1871, a congressional inquiry quietly opened and closed on the name Kentucky Disappearances Review, and all results were published. No records were released. The lead investigator went missing 3 months later. His last letter simply read, "There are rooms beneath the earth, and they know my name." By then, whispers had become warnings. Families refused to speak of it. Maps redrew themselves. Cartographers erased Millbrook altogether. But you can't delete a story that wants to survive. It mutates. In 1910, a traveling preacher in Ohio began having visions. He said he saw a house with breathing walls and brides with no eyes. He began sketching it during sermons, over and over. Same staircase, same 43 doors, same final room, a black chamber with a mirror that showed your regrets instead of your face. He was institutionalized. But before they took him, he shouted, they didn't run the inn ran them. In 1934, a group of WPA workers unearthed something beneath a church in eastern Kentucky, a room with no doors, just 43 names carved into the ceiling. No one could explain it. The report was classified, then lost in a fire, and still the melody returned. Each generation, someone hums it, a child, a traveler, a widow by the road, always the same notes, always the same feeling, like something behind the skin of the world is smiling. Modern ghost hunters laugh it off. They visit the site, film the ruins, mock the legends. But when they sleep, they all dream of the same 4 women, sisters in black, standing on a staircase that curves inward, smiling, mouths closed, but still speaking. And in those dreams, the sisters say, the inn is still here, not as wood, not as stone, but as story. And every time someone tells it, it grows, which means right now, you're inside it, this story, this room, this shape. And if you've made it this far, you've already heard the knock. So the only question left is, will you open the door? The last known photograph was taken in 1997. An amateur historian named Carter Dells was tracking unmarked graveyards across the Appalachian region. He never made the connection to Millbrook. He only knew that something about this one clearing the moss, the smell, the way the birds refused to land felt off. So he took one picture, just one, before the batteries in all his equipment died simultaneously. It shows 43 graves, no markers, no path, but in the background, almost unnoticeable, is a reflection, not in a mirror, in the air, like the space behind the stones had cracked open for a fraction of a second, long enough to reveal a room, with red curtains, a fireplace, and a woman in black, standing just out of focus, watching. Carter went missing 2 days later. His camera was found on the passenger seat of his locked car, engine still running, keys in the ignition, no footprints. The photo was undeveloped, but the film was warm. Today, the Millbrook Inn is gone, not burned, not buried, just erased by its own design, because stories like this don't die. They migrate into other houses, other inns, other places of hospitality. You check in, you smile, you sleep, but part of you knows something's wrong. The wallpaper's too old. The room number changed. The mirror's just a little too tall. And deep inside, something ancient is listening, not for prayers, not for worship, but for your grief, for your loneliness, for your willingness to be seen and remembered, because memory is the new flesh, and fear is the binding thread. So next time you hear that melody, the one that tugs at the corners of your childhood, that tune that tastes like a name you've forgotten, don't hum it, don't sing along, because that's not a song. It's a signal, a door handle turning in your mind, and when it opens, you'll see them, the sisters, still waiting, still loving, still hungry, and you'll understand. The Millbrook Inn was never about the past. It was always about you, and you're already home.